12-year-old Eli Carter thought he was doing the right thing when he turned in a lost wallet to the police until a corrupt cop, Officer Grant, falsely accused him of stealing it. Now, with fabricated evidence, the system against him, and his mother kidnapped as leverage, Eli is trapped in a fight for his life. But inside that wallet lies a hidden clue, one that could expose a criminal empire and bring down the very people trying to destroy him. With no one to trust and time running out, Eli must outsmart dirty cops, uncover the truth, and take back his life before it's too late. Before we start, buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. Eli Carter kicked at a loose rock on the sidewalk as he walked home from school, his backpack slung over one shoulder. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, and the distant hum of city traffic filled the air. His stomach rumbled. His mom wouldn't be home from work for another few hours, and dinner would have to wait. He sighed, already dreading the stale crackers he had left in the pantry. That was when he saw it. A wallet, just lying there on the ground, half hidden beneath a newspaper near the curb. Eli stopped, his heart skipping a beat. He glanced around. No one seemed to be looking for it. Bending down, he picked it up, his fingers brushing against the smooth leather. It was thick, stuffed with cash, credit cards, and a driver's license peeking out from one of the pockets. Whoever lost this was definitely rich. For a moment, a thought crept into his mind. He could take just a little. No one would know. His mom worked long shifts at the hospital, barely making ends meet. A few bills from this wallet wouldn't change the owner's life, but for Eli, it could mean a hot meal, or maybe even helping his mom pay the electric bill. But then he heard his mother's voice in his head. "We do the right thing, no matter how hard it is." Eli exhaled sharply. He knew what he had to do. Stuffing the wallet into his backpack, he turned in the direction of the police station. It wasn't far, just a few blocks from where he stood. The entire walk there, he imagined the owner's reaction, picturing some grateful businessman thanking him, maybe even rewarding him. He could already see the smile on his mom's face when he told her what he did. Inside the station, the air smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant. Officers moved about, some talking on radios, others filling out reports behind the front desk. Eli stepped forward, the wallet clutched in his hands. "Excuse me?" His voice wavered slightly. "I found this outside. I think someone lost it." The officer at the desk barely looked up. "Hand it over." Eli placed the wallet on the counter, but before he could step back, another voice cut through the noise. "Well, well, what do we have here?" A tall man with a square jaw and cold, calculating eyes approached. Officer Grant. Eli had seen him around before, always watching, always smirking like he knew something no one else did. Grant picked up the wallet, flipping through it. His expression darkened. "This wallet was reported stolen an hour ago," he said, his gaze snapping to Eli. Eli's stomach dropped. "What? No, I just found it." Grant leaned in, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "That's so? Then how come we got security footage of you taking it?" Eli's breath hitched. "That's a lie. I didn't steal anything." Grant smirked. "That's not what the camera says, kid." Before Eli could protest, Grant grabbed his wrist, twisting it behind his back. Cold steel snapped around his wrists. "You're under arrest for theft," Grant said. Eli's mind reeled. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But as the other officers barely glanced at the scene, as the station continued to buzz around him like nothing was wrong, Eli realized the truth. He was completely alone. Eli sat on the cold metal bench. Inside the dimly lit interrogation room, his hands still cuffed behind his back. His wrists ached from how tightly Officer Grant had locked them. The room smelled like sweat and stale coffee, the walls bare except for a security camera in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. His heart pounded in his chest. This had to be a mistake. Any second now, someone would walk in and clear everything up. They'd check the facts, see he had done nothing wrong, and let him go home. The door creaked open, and Officer Grant strolled in, a smug grin plastered across his face. He dropped the wallet onto the table and pulled out a chair across from Eli, sitting down slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "So," Grant said, leaning forward, elbows on the table. Why don't you tell me the truth, kid? You saw this wallet lying around and decided you'd help yourself, didn't you? Eli shook his head frantically. No, I told you, I found it on the sidewalk near the diner. I was bringing it here to turn it in. You expect me to believe that? He opened the wallet, flipping through the cash. Big wad of money in here. Pretty tempting for a kid from your neighborhood, huh? Eli's hands clenched into fists behind his back. I didn't take anything. I swear, Grant sighed, rubbing his chin as if considering something. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, grainy photo. He slid it across the table toward Eli. It was a blurry, still image of a kid in a hoodie, reaching toward what looked like a wallet. Eli's stomach twisted. That's not me, he whispered. Grant shrugged. Looks like you to me, and to the judge. It will too. Panic surged through Eli's chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. He had done everything right. He had tried to do the right thing. A loud knock on the door made them both look up. The door opened, and a woman in a gray blazer stepped in. His mother, Sarah. She looked frantic, her curly hair disheveled like she had run the entire way to the station. Her eyes locked onto Eli's, wide with fear. My son is 12 years old, she said, her voice shaking but firm. He's not answering another question without. A lawyer, Grant exhaled sharply, standing up. You're free to go, he said, unlocking Eli's cuffs. For now. Eli rubbed his sore wrists as his mother pulled him into a tight hug. He could feel her heartbeat racing against his own. As they left the station, Grant's voice followed. To them. I'll be seeing you real soon, kid. Eli didn't know what he meant then, but by the time he got home, he would. The walk home was silent. Eli's mother held his wrist tight, her grip firm but trembling. She hadn't said a word since they left the station, her face locked in an expression he had never seen before, fear mixed with anger, barely contained beneath the surface. When they reached their apartment, she slammed the door behind them, locking the deadbolt and sliding the chain into place. She turned to Eli, her breathing heavy. What happened? She demanded. Eli's throat tightened. I told the truth. I found the wallet, turned it in, and Grant he said I stole it. He showed me some fake picture and Sarah pressed a hand to her forehead, exhaling sharply. I knew something was wrong the second they called me. That officer, I've seen him before, Eli. He's bad news. Eli swallowed hard. Why would he do this? I didn't do anything. Her jaw clenched. Because some people don't need a reason. They just want power. She pulled him into another hug, squeezing him tight. You're okay now. You're home. But something inside Eli told him she was wrong. Hours later, after she had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from the stress, Eli lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced. Grant had been too sure, too confident. It wasn't just some random accusation. He wanted Eli out of the way. But why? A buzzing sound made him flinch. His phone. He grabbed it off the nightstand and saw an unknown number flashing across the screen. Hesitant, he answered. A deep voice spoke on the other end. If you ever want to see your mother again, keep your mouth shut about that wallet. Eli sat up so fast his head spun. What? The line went dead. He bolted out of bed and ran to the living room. Mom! He called. No answer. The blanket on the couch was tossed aside. The door was still locked, the chain still in place. But she was gone. His chest tightened. He rushed to the kitchen, to the bathroom, empty. Panic took over, making his hands shake. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. A folded piece of paper sat on the kitchen table. He picked it up with trembling fingers. Stay quiet, don't run, we're watching. His stomach turned to ice. This was because of the wallet. Because of Officer Grant. Eli's hands curled into fists. He could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. They thought he was just some dumb kid. They thought they could scare him into silence. But they took his mother, and he was going to get her back. Eli's hands trembled as he clutched the note. His breath came in shallow gasps, his mind racing with every worst-case scenario. His mother was gone, kidnapped, because of that wallet, because of Grant. He forced himself to think. Panicking wouldn't help. He needed to do something, his first. Instinct was to call 911, but he hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. Who would he even trust? The police station was crawling with Grant's people, and if they had taken his mother, they wouldn't hesitate to make him disappear too. Instead, he called the only person he could trust. "Marcus," he whispered, urgently when his best friend picked up. "I need your help." Minutes later, Eli was sprinting down the dark streets toward Marcus's house, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. The city felt different now. Every passing car, every shadowed alley felt like the door, his wide eyes full of confusion and concern. "Dude, what's going on? You sounded... They took my mom." Eli interrupted, still breathless. "It's Grant. It's the cops. They..." He shook his head, trying to make sense of it. "They left a note, told me to stay quiet." Marcus's face drained of color. "What? Why? What do they want?" Eli opened his backpack and pulled out the wallet. "It has to be this. I turned it in, and now they're trying to frame me. Grant acted like I stole it, but there's something inside they don't want anyone to find." Marcus frowned, flipping through the wallet's contents: cash, cards, receipts. "Nothing special here," he muttered. "Wait." He ran his fingers along the lining, his expression changing. "Hold up. This is thicker than it should be." Carefully, he pulled back the leather near the seam. A tiny slit appeared, a compartment that had been stitched shut. Eli's heart pounded as Marcus carefully pried it open. A small silver key slipped out, clinking against the table. Both boys stared at it. Eli picked it up, turning it over in his palm. No markings, no numbers, just a plain, unassuming key. "This is what they're after?" Marcus asked. Eli swallowed hard. "It has to be." Marcus grabbed his laptop, already typing furiously. Okay, let's think. "If this is a key, it has to go to something. Lockers, storage units, safety deposit boxes." Eli's hands tightened around the key. "We need to find out where. Fast." Marcus's screen blinked with search results. After a few minutes of cross-referencing locker styles and key shapes, they found a match: a private storage facility downtown. Eli exhaled sharply. His fingers curled into a fist around the key. If this was what Grant wanted to bury, then this was where he was going to start digging. The storage facility loomed ahead, its high metal fencing lined with security cameras that blinked red in the night. A large sign read, "Horizon Secure Storage, private access only." The building stretched along the block, its dull gray walls giving no indication of the secrets hidden inside. Eli and Marcus stood across the street, shrouded in the darkness of an alley. Eli's fingers tightened around the small silver key. In his pocket, this was it. Whatever was inside that locker was important enough for Grant to kidnap his mom and frame him. It was his only chance to find the truth. Marcus adjusted his backpack, eyes darting nervously toward the facilities. Gated entrance. "This is crazy," he muttered. "There's cameras, security, probably alarms." Eli turned to him, eyes sharp. "Then let's not get caught." Marcus sighed but nodded, pulling his phone out. Okay. The system here isn't high-end, which is good for us. Cameras run on a basic loop with a delay. He tapped his screen a few times. "If I can get into the facility's feed, I can freeze the cameras for a couple of minutes, long enough for us to get in." Eli watched as Marcus worked, his fingers moving fast over the keyboard. Every second felt like an eternity. Then, "Got it," Marcus whispered. "You've got a 2-minute window before the system resets." Eli bolted across the street. He reached the fence and hoisted himself up, his fingers gripping the cold metal as he climbed. At the top, he swung himself over and landed with a soft thud. A second later, Marcus followed, grunting as he hit the ground beside him. The storage units stretched out in long rows, each door marked with a number. Eli pulled out the key, his breath quickening. "Unit 107. He whispered. They moved fast, sneakers barely making a sound on the pavement. As they reached the unit, Eli's hands shook as he fit the key into the rusted padlock. It clicked open with an eerie softness. He exchanged a look with Marcus before lifting the metal door. Inside was a single black duffel bag sitting in the middle of the otherwise empty unit. Eli stepped forward, unzipped it, and froze. Stacks of cash. Dozens of burner phones, a USB drive, a manila folder stuffed with documents. Marcus whistled under his breath. "Dude, This isn't just dirty money. This is evidence. Eli's hands shook as he picked up the folder, flipping through papers. Filled with names, transaction records, police reports, all doctored. And there, Officer Grant's name. His stomach turned. "This is proof," he whispered. "This is why they framed me. Why they took my mom." A low voice suddenly echoed behind them. "That's right, kid." They spun just as a flashlight blinded them, and a group of men stepped into the storage unit. Eli's heart slammed in his chest. They had walked straight into a trap. Eli's breath caught in his throat as the flashlight beam seared into his eyes. His pulse pounded in his ears, drowning out everything but the heavy footsteps closing in. "Did you really think you could just walk in here and take what isn't yours?" The voice was low, cold, and under around the manila folder. This was it. They had found the evidence, but now they were trapped. Marcus shifted beside him, his breath shaky. We didn't take anything," he stammered. "We were just..." "Shut up," Grant barked. He stepped into view, his face twisted into an amused smirk. He wasn't alone. 2 other officers, ones Eli had seen lurking around the station, flanked him, hands resting on their holsters. Grant shook his head, eyes filled with something between pity and menace. "I'll admit, I didn't expect you to be this stupid. Carter, but here you are." He gestured toward the bag of money and documents. "Now you've seen too much." Eli's mind raced. Options. He needed options. There were 3 of them, 2 of him and Marcus. They had no weapons, no backup, no way out except the storage unit door. If they could reach the exit, make it to the street. Grant stepped forward, pulling a silencer from his coat and screwing it onto his gun. "It's a shame, really," he sighed. "You could have just let this go. Now." "Well," Eli moved. He threw the folder into Grant's face, sending papers flying as he lunged for the duffel bag. Gripping it tight, he swung it as hard as he could, slamming it into the officer to Grant's right. The man staggered back, grunting in pain. "Run!" Eli shouted. Marcus didn't hesitate. He bolted toward the exit, Eli right behind him. Gunfire erupted. A bullet whizzed past Eli's ear, splintering against the metal doorframe as they burst into the open lot. The night air felt sharp and electric with adrenaline. Marcus gasped, "Fence! Go!" They sprinted, the pounding footsteps of the officers gaining on them. The duffel bag slammed against Eli's back with every step, but he didn't let go. This was their proof. Marcus reached the fence first, scrambling up like his life depended on it, because it did. Eli followed, gripping the cold chain links, muscles burning. A rough hand snatched at his ankle, but he kicked hard, catching the officer in the face. He cleared the top just as Grant fired again, but this time the bullet struck the fence, sending sparks flying. Eli and Marcus hit the ground running. They tore through the empty streets, lungs screaming for air, not daring to stop, not daring to look back. Because they weren't just running for their lives, they were running with the truth. Eli and Marcus ran until their legs burned and their lungs felt like they were going to burst. They didn't stop until they reached Marcus's neighborhood, diving into the shadows between 2 buildings, both of them hunched over, gasping for air, the cold night pressing against their sweat-soaked skin. Eli clutched the duffel bag to his chest, his fingers aching from how tightly he had been gripping it. Inside was everything. The money, the burner phones, the documents that proved Grant and his men were dirty cops. Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Dude, we almost died." Eli swallowed, his heartbeat still thudding in his ears. "Yeah, but we got the proof." Marcus shot him a look. "And what are we supposed to do with it? Walk into a police station and say, 'Hey, your own guys are criminals?'" He shook his head. "We don't have anyone to trust, Eli. They own the cops. They have people everywhere. We can't just hand this over to the wrong person." Eli leaned back against the wall, running a hand through his hair. Marcus was right. This wasn't some movie where the truth alone would set everything right. Grant had framed him in a matter of minutes, twisted the system against him like it was nothing. If they weren't careful, he'd make sure this evidence disappeared, and them along with it. His chest tightened. His mom was still missing. Every second they wasted was another second she was out there, alone, at Grant's mercy. Eli's eyes narrowed. "Then we don't give them a chance to bury it." Marcus frowned. What do you mean? Eli unzipped the bag and pulled out the USB drive. There's only one way to make sure this gets seen. We don't hand it over. We make it public. Marcus stared at him, then at the drive. His expression shifted from confusion to understanding. You mean, leak it? Eli nodded. We get this out there. Everywhere. News stations, social media, anywhere we can. If everyone sees it, Grant can't cover it up. Marcus hesitated, then exhaled sharply. Okay, but we need to do it fast. The second Grant realizes we got away with this, he'll be coming after us. Eli's grip on the drive tightened. Then let's not waste time. They slipped into Marcus's house. Through the back door, moving quickly and quietly, Marcus's parents were asleep, unaware that two fugitives were about to blow open one of the biggest police corruption cases in the city's history. Marcus booted up his laptop, plugging in the USB. Eli hovered over his shoulder as the files loaded onto the screen. Financial records, payoffs, case files manipulated to protect criminals. It was all there. Eli's pulse quickened, ready to send everything out. Then a loud knock rattled the front door. Both boys froze. A voice called out, "Police! Open up!" Marcus's hands hovered over the keyboard, his face pale. Eli barely breathed. The knock came again, harder this time. "Open the door! Police!" Eli's mind raced. They found us somehow. Grant had tracked them here. Maybe the facility had cameras outside. Maybe someone had seen them running. It didn't matter. If they opened that door, they were dead. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. What do we do? Eli's eyes darted to the laptop. The USB was still loading, the files transferring onto Marcus's private server. They just needed a little more time. A flashlight beam swept across the front windows. Shadows moved outside. More than one cop. Eli's heart slammed against his ribs. We have to stall. Marcus's hands were shaking as he closed the laptop screen, his voice trembling. Stall? How? The front door rattled. They were trying to force it open. Eli grabbed the duffel bag and yanked Marcus toward the hallway. Back door. Now. Footsteps thudded against the porch as the cops moved in. A second later, the front door burst open. Eli and Marcus sprinted down the hall just as voices shouted behind them. Stop! Police! They didn't stop. Eli tore through the kitchen, his mind locked on one thought. Get out! Get out! Get out! He reached the back door, unlocked it, and shoved. It opened. The cold air hit him as he and Marcus lunged into the backyard. The second they hit the grass, a gunshot cracked through the air. Eli ducked, his heart slamming in terror. They were shooting. Marcus yelped but kept running. Fence! Eli sprinted. Toward it, adrenaline drowning out everything else. The cops were crashing through the house behind them, shouting orders, but Eli blocked it out. They reached the wooden fence at the edge of the yard. Marcus jumped first, scrambling up and over, landing hard on the other side. Eli tossed the duffel bag over, then grabbed the top of the fence just as the back door burst open behind him. Freeze! He ignored the voice, pulling himself over. Just as another gunshot blasted through the night, Eli hit the ground running. He grabbed the duffel bag and tore down the alley with Marcus, neither of them looking back. The city blurred around them, streetlights, parked cars, distant sirens. They ran for blocks, ducking through back streets, weaving through alleys. When they finally stopped, it was in the dark recess of an abandoned lot. Eli collapsed against a wall, gasping for breath. Marcus panted beside him. They were shooting at us. Eli's hands clenched into fists. They're not cops, not real ones. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead. What now? Eli looked at the USB drive in his hand. We finish what we started. Eli's fingers tightened around the USB drive as he leaned against the cold brick wall, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on him like a boulder. Grant's men had fired at them. Real cops didn't do that. Marcus wiped his face with his sleeve, his breathing still uneven. We're dead, man, he muttered. They know who we are, where I live. We can't go back there. We can't go anywhere. Eli forced himself to think past the panic clawing at his chest. We don't have to run anymore. He held up the USB. We have this. We just need to make sure everyone sees it. Marcus swallowed hard but nodded. Okay, but how? Eli exhaled, trying to slow his heartbeat. We take it straight. To a judge, one that isn't dirty. Once this gets into the right hands, Grant won't be able to cover it up, Marcus frowned. And how do we know who to trust? Eli hesitated, then pulled out his phone. There was only one person who had tried to help him before, one person who had sensed something was wrong when Grant first accused him, Daniel Harper. The lawyer. Eli's fingers hovered over the screen. He didn't have Harper's number, but he knew where to find him. He'd seen his office before, downtown, near the courthouse. We go to Harper, Eli said firmly. If anyone can get this in front of a judge, it's him. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment he just sighed. Fine, let's just get this over with before we get shot again. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. The city was alive around them, cars rushing past, people going about their night like nothing was wrong, like two kids weren't, running for their lives. It took nearly an hour to reach Harper's office. The building was tall, its glass windows reflecting the city lights. The sign above the door read, Harper and Associates. Eli's stomach twisted as he pushed the door open. The small waiting area was empty, except for a receptionist desk. A voice called from the back. We're closed. Harper appeared, his eyes narrowing the moment he saw them. What the hell? You were right. About Grant, about everything. He pulled out the USB drive, shoving it into Harper's hands. This has proof. Corruption, money laundering, everything. And they took my mom. Harper's face darkened. He looked between Eli and Marcus, then at the USB in his palm, his jaw clenched. Come with me, he said. Eli felt it then. A shift. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about ending this nightmare once and for all. Harper locked the office door behind them, his movements tense. He led Eli and Marcus through a dimly lit hallway into a back room lined with shelves, stacked with thick legal books. The moment they were inside, he turned, his expression unreadable. Tell me everything, he said. Eli didn't waste a second. He spilled everything, finding the wallet, Grant framing him, the hidden key, the storage unit, the evidence, the chase, the shooting. Every word tumbled out of him, fast and desperate, because this was it. If Harper didn't believe him, if this didn't work, they had nowhere left to go. Harper's face remained stoic, but his hands clenched into fists. At certain details, especially the kidnapping. When Eli finally finished, Harper exhaled sharply and rubbed a hand down his face. This is worse than I thought, he muttered. He turned to his desk, plugging the USB drive into his computer. The screen flickered as files loaded, revealing dozens of records, transaction logs, and messages connecting Grant to a massive web of corruption. Harper clicked through the documents, his eyes scanning them quickly. This isn't just Grant, he murmured. This is an entire network, judges, officers, city officials. This is a damn operation. Eli's stomach twisted. So what do we do? Harper stood up, grabbing his phone. We take this straight to a federal judge, someone outside Grant's reach. If we can get this into the right hands before they realize we have it, this could bring them all down. Marcus scoffed. Yeah, that sounds great and all, but what if they find us first? A loud bang outside the office made them all flinch. Eli's blood ran cold. Harper cursed under his breath and moved to the window. His jaw tightened. They're here. Eli's stomach lurched. Grant? Harper nodded. 3 cars, unmarked. Marcus swore under his breath. We're dead. Eli's pulse pounded. He turned to Harper. We have to get out of here. Harper moved fast, grabbing the USB drive and shoving it into his pocket. Follow me, he ordered, heading toward the back of the office. Eli and Marcus barely kept up as Harper led them down a flight of stairs into a parking garage. He pulled out his keys, unlocking a black sedan. Get in, he ordered. Eli barely had time to slam the door shut before Harper peeled out of the garage. Behind them, the unmarked cars roared to life. Gunfire shattered the back window. Eli ducked as Marcus screamed. Harper cursed and swerved, dodging cars as they sped onto the highway. Eli gritted his teeth. This wasn't just about proving his innocence anymore. This was war. The tires squealed against the pavement as Harper swerved onto the main road, dodging. He parked car by inches. The The unmarked vehicles followed close behind, their headlights flooding the sedan's interior with blinding light. Eli clutched the door handle, his heart hammering. "They're shooting at us!" Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. "No kidding," Harper growled, gripping the wheel tightly. He checked the rearview mirror, his face set in grim determination. "Hold on!" Eli barely had time to brace himself before Harper jerked the wheel hard to the right, cutting across an empty intersection. The pursuing cars skidded, tires screeching, but they recovered quickly, closing the distance. A shot rang out. The side mirror exploded in a shower of glass. Eli flinched, but forced himself to think. They weren't going to outrun them forever. "They needed to end this. Where are we going?" Eli demanded. "To the courthouse," Harper said through gritted teeth. "We get inside, we get this in front of a federal judge. Once it's on record, Grant can't bury it." Eli's stomach twisted. "And if they catch us before we get there?" Harper didn't answer. Suddenly, a third vehicle appeared ahead, swerving onto the road, blocking their path. Harper cursed and hit the brakes hard. The tires screamed and the car spun violently, barely stopping before slamming into the new roadblock. Before any of them could react, doors flew open. Grant stepped. Out Eli's blood turned to ice. Grant walked forward, his gun already drawn. His face was calm, almost amused. He knew he had won. More officers emerged from the other cars, their weapons raised. Nowhere to run. Harper's knuckles turned white against the steering wheel. "Stay in the car," he ordered. Eli clenched his fists. No, this couldn't be how it ended. Grant reached the hood of their car, tapping it lazily with his gun. Then he leaned down, looking straight through the windshield at Grant said, his voice smug. "But it's over." Eli felt something deep in his chest snap. Not like this. Without thinking, he lunged forward, grabbed Harper's phone and hit the call button on the screen. The operator's voice crackled through the speaker. 911, what's your emergency?" Eli pressed the phone against his chest, hoping the operator could still hear. "I'm Eli Carter. I have evidence of police corruption, and we're surrounded by armed officers trying to kill us. If I die..." "They did it!" Grant's smirk faded. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Then, sirens, distant at first. Then closer. Eli held his breath. Lights appeared down the street, and then real police cars flooded the intersection. The moment the real police cars screeched into the intersection, everything shifted. Grant's face darkened, his confidence replaced by something colder, calculation. His grip on the gun tightened, but he hesitated. The flashing red and blue lights bathed the street in an eerie glow, cutting through the night like a warning. Eli held his breath as officers poured out of the squad cars, weapons raised. But this time, they weren't pointing at him. A commanding voice boomed over the chaos. "Drop your weapon, hands in the air." For a moment, no one moved. Then, Grant smirked. Slowly, almost lazily, he raised his hands, letting the gun dangle from his fingers. He glanced at Eli, his expression unreadable. "Smart kid," he muttered. The second Grant's gun hit the pavement, the officers rushed in. 2 cops tackled him to the ground, pinning his arms behind his back. Others moved in on his men, yanking them from their cars, disarming them one by one. Eli slumped against the car door, his entire body shaking. It was over. It was finally over. Harper let out a breath and turned to Eli. "You just put the final nail in his coffin, kid." Eli barely heard him. His thoughts were already somewhere else. His mom. He shoved the car door open and staggered out, nearly tripping over his own feet. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice raw. He turned to one of the officers. "My mom. They took her." The officer hesitated, glancing toward Harper. Harper stepped forward, his face grim but steady. "They'll find her, Eli. With Grant in custody, his entire operation is about to collapse. Someone will talk." Eli shook his head. That wasn't good enough. She was out there now, alone, afraid, then a voice, weak, familiar. "Eli?" He spun so fast his vision blurred. There, just past the line of squad cars. A woman in scrubs, face pale, tears streaking her cheeks. His mom. Eli's breath hitched, and then he was running. She barely had time to open her arms before Eli crashed into her, gripping her as if she might disappear again. She clutched him just as tightly, her body shaking with silent sobs. I thought I'd never see you again." she whispered, her voice breaking. Eli buried his face in her shoulder, finally letting the fear fall away. Me too. Around them, the scene unfolded, officers hauling Grant and his men into squad cars, Harper talking to detectives, the USB drive now in the right hands. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Eli had his mom. He had the truth, and for the first time in days, he could finally breathe. As they walked away, Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out the wallet that started it all. He turned it over in his hands. Then he closed it and never looked back.